Hey everyone. Hey vinyl community. That's what everybody else calls you, so I suppose I will as well. My name is Chris, aka What Can Brown. Pretty active on Instagram, and this is my first video on YouTube. We'll see whether this even sticks, whether even what I say has any any relevance, or you believe it's even worthwhile listening to. That remains to be seen. But yeah, this is my first video, and I thought that I would introduce myself, kind of kick things off. My intention with this is, I don't even know what actually. I like talking about jazz. I like talking about jazz vinyl. It's a passion of mine. I spend a lot of time thinking about it on any given day. And I think as those of you who follow me on Instagram know, I like sharing my opinion. Doesn't have to be necessarily the opinion of everyone, but I have strong opinions about the way that this hobby has gone. I've personally been collecting since 2011, so not terribly long, at least in terms of all the folks who are out there. I think maybe I'm a little bit of an old hat on social media, but there's plenty of people who've been collecting for decades and decades who just aren't on social media. I think I have a reputation for being somewhat on the snarky side in terms of complaints about the hobby, about how much you have to pay for records, about how much they go for online, especially on eBay, maybe to a lesser extent Discogs. And I'm probably going to continue some of that. I can't frankly help it. I'm quite the selfish collector, probably as many of us are. When I see high prices, it bums me out because I think that this stuff should be, able to be gotten more reasonably. But then at the same time, as soon as I have it, I obviously would want to make sure that it's valued as high as it possibly can be. So what to expect with this channel? I think it's going to be a lot of probably what you've heard from me on Instagram complaints, because I have plenty of them. I also actually want to focus a little bit on sort of A/B testing. So most of my collection is original pressing, and I would say for the first 9 years at least of the 10 or 11 that I've been collecting was exclusively original pressing. I felt like that was very important, and only in the last couple of years have I started to expand my horizons a little bit. And I think part of that is because the cost of vinyl has kept going up, and I've realized that my strategy, which was essentially to get at least a copy of every record that I wanted, regardless of the condition, wasn't necessarily the best one, because it's not enjoyable to listen to. And over the last several years, I think we've all realized that there's a number of labels. You have Blue Note's Tone Poet, you have Prestige with Analog Productions, you have Impulse's 60th anniversary series. I suppose you also have Electric Recording Company, and you have some of these other sort of high-end audiophile labels putting out all this great music, and in many cases it's you're able to hear this music truly in the way that it was meant to be heard. And so, do I want to listen to a G+ copy of, Tenor Madness, or do I want to hear the Analog Productions copy that's brand new right off the shelf? Well, the answer is I want to listen to that. So I love this idea, though, of A/B testing with the originals and with the modern reissues. And so I think there's going to be some of that with this channel. I love talking about jazz history, and I'm not a historian. I read the same, liner notes that everybody else does. I tend to read a lot of books about it as well. And to be fair, I think a lot about this medium throughout the day, which is why I kind of have this sort of, sporadic posts, especially in stories on Instagram throughout the day. But all of that, I think, is what I want to bring to this sort of more video format. I mean, you're sort of limited both by character count in a Instagram post, but also in the amount of seconds that you can put together a quick single shot video for Instagram stories. So I thought I'd kick things off basically by starting with one of these A/B tests that I referenced, and the first one that I wanted to start with was actually Grant Green's Sunday Morning. So this is something I posted about recently, and the central concept behind my at least interest in talking about this is that the record was released in what, I don't know, early 60s, 61, something like that. And it has had basically no reissues of any quality since that time up until very, very recently. Just a couple of years ago, there's an outfit called Slow Down Sounds that put out this reissue. And the interesting thing about it is that Tone Poet had already launched, as far as I can tell. And yet, not only didn't they include it in Tone Poet, but Kevin Gray, who has participated in Tone Poet, decided to also participate in this kind of like sort of side project with Slow Down Sounds in order to release Sunday Morning, and it wasn't given a broad release. And so I find that very interesting because I would think that there'd be a sort of a wider audience for this type of music. Certainly Grant Green's records, because his material has been featured in Tone Poet already in terms of unreleased sessions, as well as I think released sessions, and certainly his stuff has been featured on Music Matters as well. And so it's interesting to me that Sunday Morning is this kind of this sort of exception, right? Like, why did they decide to basically farm it out to another label for distribution in some sort of limited setting? And so I find it an interesting release. It's a very worthwhile record. And, fortunately in this case, I have not only the original stereo release, but I also have a copy actually very recently of this of this reissue. They put it out on blue vinyl. Generally speaking, not a fan of color vinyl, but I suppose as long as it sounds just as good as the standard stuff, then I don't really care. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk about these two because they are very different, and I do have an opinion about which is the better listening experience. So first, from a just purely sort of visible observation, original record. These always have kind of that sort of cream colored versus a sort of bright whites, and it kind of is what it is, right? It's a classic Reed Miles design, and it looks great, and actually they did a pretty good job. They certainly brightened it up for this reissue. You can obviously see that it's whiter or grayer. But they did a really good job with this reissue for Slow Down Sounds. I mean, this is a Stoughton cover. It's pressed by RTI. Kevin Gray is behind the mastering of this thing. So again, the hallmarks of Tone Poet. For those who care about the tactile nature, it feels good. It's glossy. It's all of those things, right? So it's certainly a quality product. However, like I said, there's actually some pretty substantial differences that I found in the playback between these two records. And that's kind of what I think makes the difference between the two. So firstly, the biggest difference is that, and this is something that's actually true across the two of them. Grant Green is in the right channel, and the rhythm section is in the left. So that's going to be the case across both of these copies, but I think the difference is to what extent is that the case? And actually what I'm getting at is that in this reissue, Grant is much more in the right channel, versus the original where he's a little bit more middle, still mostly in the right, but a little bit more middle. Grant Green doesn't exactly use sustains very much with his playing, and so it's actually kind of hard to gauge, I guess, accuracy in terms of like sort of the sonic nature of like when is he plucking the string and when are you hearing it and when does it stop and that kind of thing. He's very like sort of percussive for lack of a better term, with his playing, and so it's difficult to talk about. I think this particular session in terms of accuracy when you're listening to it, and certainly one versus the other. The cymbals in this reissue especially are certainly bright. That's been a critique, I would say, of Tone Poet. A lot of people say that the Tone Poet percussion is especially, splashy is a term that people have used, or that it's the sort of high treble noise, and that is accurate here, at least compared to the original. So it is brighter in terms of the percussion and in terms of the cymbals. The bass is actually slightly muddy, that I found in the reissue, and the piano kind of fades to the background a little bit. And I think that this is because the sort of prioritization of drums and of bass, and it's difficult for the piano to sort of break through that. And in fact, if there's any instrument in this particular edition, it's hardest to hear the piano. So another sort of critique is actually room noise with this edition. So the bass has a tendency to be a little boomy, and the hi-hat, I find, especially with the drums, has a lot more room noise than what I would expect, and a lot more room noise than the original. And in fact, it kind of materializes in terms of a little bit of echo. Which is strange, because you want to hear a little bit of bouncing off the rooms to give you a sense that it's there, but you don't necessarily want there to be echo unless it's one of these sort of later or mid to late 60s Blue Note sessions, sort of the soul jazz sessions where they're going for that specifically. And actually the guitar, Grant Green's guitar, has a little bit of room noise as well, which is surprising. And I guess how that materializes is less pronounced attacks, more of like reverberation in the room. And so I think that this difference is most pronounced on track 1 of side 2, which is called God Bless the Child. And the biggest problem, though, is that the drums sort of take over the guitar and the piano, with the piano being, like I said, too muffled. So to some extent, the music sounds a little bit unnatural, even when some of these solos are happening, and it's because of the room noise that seems more pronounced with the reissue. And you could say that it's more representative of the session, which may be right, but my point of reference is the original, and it doesn't quite have that same amount of, again, room noise. All right, so that's the reissue. Now, the original copy, which is, to be fair, what I'm more familiar with, in this one, relatively speaking, the cymbals are indeed less pronounced than in the Tone Poet. And the piano feels like it comes through clearer. It's not as pushed to the back. Oddly, the guitar sounds clearer and more dynamic, which actually I wouldn't have expected with the original versus the reissue, because I tend to feel like in the reissues they prioritize the leader a little bit. From a sort of stereo separation standpoint, the piano feels a little bit more center, and not as left with the rest of the rhythm section. And so just generally speaking, it feels better balanced. Now, granted, there's more noise with the original, and this is a 70-year-old record. So even if my copy is, I don't know what it is, let's say it's VG Plus, there's still going to be a little bit of noise that's going to come with it, whereas the reissue is going to be a lot more silent. But at the same time, I feel like because there's less room noise and because the bass isn't as boomy, it almost compensates for the fact that that there's a little bit more noise in this original copy. So where there's more, I would say, dynamics in playing, I think is where the original shines. I think it's better balanced than this reissue. I think the guitar is quieter, and I think that the cymbals are not quite as splashy. And so, these are sort of subtle nuances between the two copies, but they're there, and there truly is a difference between them. I think that if I didn't have this original, then I'd be perfectly happy picking up this reissue. But given the ability, I suppose, to compare the two, what do I want to listen to? I want to listen to the original. And one thing I'll caveat that statement with is that that's not necessarily always the case with my assessment of the tone poets, because I think that there's plenty of tone poets that actually outdo the original, much more enjoyable in sound. I just don't personally think that that's the case with this one, and you have to wonder, is that the reason why they pushed it off to a sort of another label to put out? And I don't want to say anything disparaging about how that might have gone down. I mean, if I was a small label, I would love the opportunity to put out a lesser known, perhaps Blue Note title. And I think that they did a great job. Anybody who is looking for this record would be very happy with this reissue on blue vinyl, or I want to say that there's a red, white, and blue one, and I want to say that there's a black one as well. But each of them are limited, and each of them are difficult to find. And I think you'd be happy with any of them. So that's kind of it. I mean, first video. I think that this is probably at least a good indication of where things are headed. Like I said, A/B testing is something I like to do because I take in a lot of records, but I also sell a lot, right? So as soon as I get something in order to do that A/B test, I don't keep both of them. I don't have multiple copies of very many records. Kind of Blue and probably a few others might be an exception, but generally speaking, I want the best sounding edition that there is. And so, in these types of situations, it's usually me posting about something as I'm going through the thought process and as I'm coming to a conclusion, and then one is out the door. That's the only way that this sort of hobby can sustain itself. So appreciate everybody watching. Everybody says like and subscribe, because I suppose that's important. So do that. And we'll see how frequently I do these things. Like to do it every day, probably more realistically every couple of days, but we'll see how that shakes out. So thanks everyone, and tune in next time.